Welcome back. We've had a couple of weeks off from lessons. We had 1 week we didn't have class, and the week before that we did review. So we're starting kind of a new section today. We're still going through the Gospels, but I've decided we'll be a little bit more thematic. So we're going to spend about 8 weeks looking at some miracles of Jesus. So we'll start with a little review because we've already seen some miracles, and we might ask what a miracle is, which is something that happens that's out of the ordinary, that doesn't follow the usual rules. And the class might remember what miracles we've seen. If not, we can remind them that one of these miracles, let me go a little bit lower down here. One of these miracles happened at a wedding. So I'm drawing a bride and a groom. And we could talk about how they had a feast at their wedding. We're going to put some food on the table. There's some bread and maybe some grapes. And they would have had friends come to the wedding. And among those friends was Jesus and his mother and his disciples. And hopefully that's enough to jog the memory and remember what miracle Jesus performed at the wedding, which was that they ran out of wine. And so he took giant vats of water and he turned them into wine. And of course, water does not normally turn into wine, and so that's why this is a miracle. Now, the other miracle that we had was one that happened even earlier on. It also involved Jesus, and he was with his disciples. I'll draw him a couple of disciples, and they went to stay with someone. That someone was Peter's mother-in-law, and you may remember that she was sick in bed. Let's make her look sick. And she had a fever, so she felt very hot and cold all at once and was very sick. And Jesus came, and if you remember, he rebuked the fever and said something like, "Fever, be gone." And immediately she got up, and she was happy and healthy, and she was able to serve them. So she might have some bread and maybe some cups and things to serve them. And if you've ever been very, very sick, you know that even when you get better, you don't all of a sudden feel better. Usually you feel weak in things for a while. So the fact that she went from having this bad fever to all of a sudden being able to serve them shows that this was not just a normal healing. This was a miraculous healing that Jesus did. Now, we're skipping a few stories. During the time of the stories we're skipping, Jesus traveled some. So we're going to spend a little bit of time, since we just have a short story this week, talking about maps and the land of Israel. Kids who've been in my class in the past have always enjoyed my maps, mainly because I draw them so badly. So this is going to be my really bad map of the Holy Land again. So over here is an ocean. I'm drawing some waves. This is the Mediterranean Ocean, and it would have some pretty big fish. Sorry, there should be one fin up there. There's the teeth. So we can draw some fish in the Mediterranean Ocean, some pretty big fish. And this is going to be the land of Israel, where God's people lived, including Jesus. And it has two big lakes called seas, with a river running between them. And kids who've been in my class before might remember some of the names here. This river is the River Jordan. And this is the river that John baptized Jesus in. And when John was ministering in the desert, and when Jesus went to the desert to be tempted, he might have been over here on the far side of the Jordan River. I'm drawing one of my palm trees, so we'll know that that's the desert. At this end of the Jordan River is the Sea of Galilee. I'm putting a G for Galilee. And we can put some fish in this sea, because as we'll see next week, there were a lot of fish in this sea that the disciples fished for. Down at the other end is the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea, I'm not going to draw any fish in. There's no fish there. The reason it's called the Dead Sea is because nothing can live in it because it's so salty. And this is a pretty mountainous country, so I'm going to draw some mountains in between. If you have very little kids, you might even want to talk a little bit before you do this about what a map is, how it's a picture. We had a picture a minute ago of the story of the wedding at Cana, and even though I drew little people like this, and they don't look very much like people, you knew that they were people. You knew that they represent big people. So a map is like a picture that can help tell a story about a place. And even though I draw my fish this size, no bigger than this, these are really big sharks and whales. And you know that everything is really much bigger. It just helps us see where things happen and helps us tell the story. So Jesus was born in the city of Bethlehem, starts with B, which is, and then for a little while, he and his family went to live in Egypt, if you remember, till he was 2 years old. Egypt's off this way. I always draw a pyramid for Egypt because it's known for its pyramids. So early in his life, when he went from being born, he would have gone to the land of Egypt. And then his family came back to settle in Nazareth, and that's where Jesus grew up here in the land of Galilee, near the Sea of Galilee. And we've seen that he changed water into wine at the wedding at Cana. That would have been somewhere up here, not too far from where Jesus lived. He was going to a wedding of people he knew, so it makes sense they kind of lived in the same area. In the stories we didn't read, Jesus came down from Galilee and went down to the main province of Judea, and the main city is Jerusalem. That's where the temple is. He went for a holiday. We're about to celebrate Thanksgiving, and a lot of my students might travel for the holiday. Well, Jesus traveled for the holiday of Passover down to the temple in Jerusalem. And then he came back up. On the way, he went through the land of Samaria is in between. And there's actually a lot of people there who don't like the Jews, the Samaritans. We're going to read some stories about them probably a little bit later in the year. We're not going to talk about the Samaritan woman story this week. He traveled back up through the land of Samaria and came back, actually right back to Cana, where the wedding happened, and that's where today's story is going to take place. And I'm actually going to, it's only, how many verses is this? It's only about 9 verses, so I'm actually going to read the story right from the Bible, which is something I would prefer to do, but my students tend to be very small, so I don't always do that. But I was going to read the story right from the Bible. Now it says that Jesus came again to Cana in Galilee, where he had made the water into the wine. That's up here in the north. And there was another city, another sea city, Capernaum, probably over closer to the land, to the Sea of Galilee. And there was an official who lived there, some sort of important person who worked for the government. And he had a son who was very sick. I'm going to draw his sick son in bed. And he heard that Jesus had come back from Judea to Galilee. So he went to Jesus and asked him to come down and heal his son. Jesus is over here in Cana with his disciples, and the official goes over to see him. It's a little bit of a journey. He wanted to ask Jesus to come down and heal his son, for he was on the point of death. Jesus said to him, "Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe." The official said, "Sir, come down before my child dies." So Jesus said, "Go, your son will live." The man believed the word that Jesus spoke and went on his way. And as he was headed back home, he ran into some of his servants who had come to meet him. And they told him that his son was getting better. He asked, "At what hour did my son get better?" And they said, "Yesterday at the 7th hour the fever left him." And the father knew that this was the hour when Jesus had said to him, "Your son will live." And so he believed in Jesus, he and all his household. And this was the second sign that Jesus did when he came from Judea to Galilee. That is the account we have in John's Gospel. So then we might ask some questions. Jesus said something interesting. He said, "Unless you see signs, you will not believe." But did the man believe when he saw signs? After he saw that his son had come back to good health, he did believe, but it seems like he believed Jesus even before then, because when Jesus said go home, he trusted enough to go home. So he believed more because of the sign, but the sign doesn't seem to be the only reason he believed. And we can also talk about how this is like the other miracle that we studied when Jesus cured someone from a fever. He cured Peter's mother-in-law. But there's a little bit of a difference because when Jesus cured Peter's mother-in-law, he was there and he rebuked the fever and she was right there and it left. But this time, Jesus was pretty far away. This might have been a considerable journey. It might have taken them all day. But even from that distance, he cured the boy, and we know that it was Jesus' doing because it happened at exactly the time Jesus said, your servant will be well, or your child will be well. So that's going to be the lesson for today, and I want to talk just a little bit about the activity we're doing. We had been keeping kind of a notebook with pages from all the stories we'd read, and I actually decided to send those home with my students. I made them into little books inside file folders like this. I don't have an example here, but I punched holes and we put the pages in and made file folder books. We're going to do something different this time, still with file folders. We're going to make lap books like this. It has a cover page, and you'll be able to get these on my website, and you can open up each part, and as we go through the miracles, we're going to put on different things for the different miracles. So today we're going to put on a map. My map has the places we talked about with the temple and the seas and the fish in the ocean. And depending on the age of your students, you could have them color the parts that are water blue. You could have them draw more fish in the ocean and draw fish in the Sea of Galilee, but don't draw fish in the Red Sea. Or you could have them draw more palm trees over here. And a little later, we might come back to the map and we might number things so that we know where things happened. And for today's stories, the miracles we've heard so far, we're going to have this little section that's like a flip book. It says Jesus turns water into and sick into. When we flip this one, it says into wine. Jesus turns sick into healthy. And again, the things you need for that will be on my website. And we're going to fill this up with miracles of Jesus so that when we're done with this section, 8 weeks or so in the miracles, they'll again have something to take home to help them remember all the stories.